Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Kimball. I'll be your MC today. It is a pleasure to be back with you. It's been a month or so since I've done this. A reminder that humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. It advocates the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of an open society standing for human rights and social justice. And our reader today is Mr. Laurent Beauregard. Laurent.
Okay, my reading is going to be a letter that Steven Pinker and Rebecca Goldstein wrote to the American Humanist Association. In case people need to be reminded, Steven Pinker is a psychologist and a linguist, very well known. He's written a number of books. Rebecca Goldstein is Steven Pinker's wife, and she is a philosopher and public intellectual. And importantly, for the purpose of this reading, both of these individuals were named Humanist of the Year in previous years. So with all of that as an intro, here is the letter that was written to the American Humanist Association by Steven Pinker and Rebecca Goldstein. Here goes. As former Humanists of the Year, donors to the organization, and prominent public supporters of humanism, we write to protest the decision to revoke Richard Dawkins' Humanist of the Year award because of tweets which raised questions about racial and transgender identity. Dawkins did not call for discrimination against or marginalization of any individual or group, and he explicitly denied any intention to disparage anyone or to lend support to transphobic or racist political movements. Now, it would still be completely appropriate for any of you who object to the substance of his tweets to criticize them in the Humanist magazine or in other forums, explaining the nature of your objections. But to seek to punish, dishonor, or humiliate a writer rather than engage with his words is a betrayal of humanism. The Humanist Manifesto 3 declares that the life stance of humanism is guided by reason. Since no one is infallible, reason requires that a diverse range of ideas be expressed and debated openly, including ideas that some people find unfamiliar or uncomfortable. To demonize a writer rather than address the writer's arguments is a confession that one has no rational response to them. This illiberal response is all the more damaging to an organization that claims to repudiate the repressive practices of religion. It has not been lost on commentators that an association of freethinkers has deemed certain thoughts unthinkable, that it is enforcing dogmas and catechisms by excommunicating a heretic. The AHA is turning itself into a laughingstock. This will only intensify when critics discover that past Humanists of the Year, whose awards have not been withdrawn, include Margaret Sanger, who was a proponent of eugenics, and Alice Walker, who advances lunatic anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Many other people who have been awarded by the Humanist Association have aroused controversy in their day or ours, sometimes endorsing positions we now recognize as pseudoscientific. If every Humanist of the Year could be canceled by someone who took exception to a sentence in their work, we would now have a new inquisition that would earn the mockery of every defender of traditional religion. Richard Dawkins is one of our greatest living scientists, writers, and humanists. We call on the American Humanist Association to reverse the regressive decision and undo the damage it has brought upon itself and upon the humanist movement. Signed, Rebecca Goldstein, AHA Humanist of the Year in 2011, and Steven Pinker, AHA Humanist of the Year 2006. That's it.
Thank you, Lawrence. Very thoughtful reading today, and it's nice to know, nice to keep up with what's happening with our national organization. Thank you for the reading today. Few in the Portland area live humanist principles more than this morning's presenter, Laura Golino de Lovato. Laura is the executive director of Northwest Pilot Project, a nonprofit providing housing assistance, transportation, and advocacy to very low-income seniors in Multnomah County. Laura has over 30 years of fundraising and nonprofit management experience. She holds a master's degree in library and information science from Simmons College in Boston. She serves as the commissioner on the City of Portland's Rental Services Commission. She has also served on the boards of SCRAP, Opal Environmental Justice, Portland Festival Symphony, and Portland Jazz Festival. This morning, she brings us a thoughtful and spirited discussion on rental subsidies at both the national and local levels. Let's have a warm yet muted welcome for Laura Golino de Lovato.
Thank you so much, Todd, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you again for this invitation to join you today. I'm going to do a slideshow, not from my vacation, but all about housing vouchers. And we'll look forward to some great questions after the presentation. So I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, so today, and I do want to just mention, thank you, Joyce, for inviting Pilot Project to speak. My colleague, Bobby Weinstock, was not able to be with me today. Housing vouchers are his thing, but he is here in spirit. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of housing rental vouchers, what they are, how they work, and what we're doing here in the Portland area, and specifically what Northwest Pilot Project is doing. And I'm going to start with a little bit of information about Northwest Pilot Project, so you can get a sense of how we are centered in this work around housing. So Northwest Pilot Project is, as Todd said, I'm the executive director there, and it's a nonprofit organization. We've been in the area operating and helping low-income seniors for 52 years. We help people who are 55 and older who are having challenges in getting into housing. Our specific focus area is housing and housing placement and retention. So we help people who live in Multnomah County, but we also help a lot of homeless people. We do in-depth service to about 1,500 clients a year, but we do another 1,500 or so responses for information or referrals. In addition to housing placement, we do case management, and we support older adults who can live independently by providing retention services like housekeeping, transportation, anything that they need to help to stay in their housing. And we focus on the lowest income seniors in the community, the people who have, believe it or not, there are people who have no income at all, no source of income, and the people who are living on very small amounts of income, less than $20,000 a year. And one thing that keeps us busy is that seniors are representing a larger sector of the homeless population because of the pressures of rising rents, COVID, and the fact that fixed benefits like Social Security, supplemental security insurance, SSI, disability are not going up. We also have a larger population of seniors because of the baby boomer generation. And so we've got more people over 55 who have less money, and who are trying to access stable housing in a very hot housing market. Also, very interestingly, half of seniors over 55 have no retirement savings, making it really hard for them to find housing they can afford. So 91% of the people we serve have incomes less than $20,300 a year. That's what's referred to as the median family income for people who are at 0 to 30% of the standard median family income for the region. 80% of the folks that we work with are disabled, 8% are chronically homeless, and 61 are over age 62. And that boggles my mind every day to think about the number of older adults over 62 who are at risk of homelessness or who are currently homeless, and just really not acceptable. So our work with rent assistance is very much tied to our mission of addressing housing stability for seniors, because it's an extremely effective way to make housing affordable for our clients. So I want to give a little bit of background about what housing vouchers are. And they're essentially a government subsidy created to assist very low or extremely low income people so that they could afford safe, decent housing within the private housing market. So this is the vouchers are separate from public housing buildings or subsidized buildings. You'll also hear housing vouchers referred to as rent assistance, rent subsidies, housing choice vouchers, and a term that you've probably all heard, Section 8. And so vouchers are intended to fill the gap between what a household can pay and what their apartment costs them. So if you are making, $1,000 a year and you're only supposed to pay 30% of your income in rent, get $333 toward rent, that's not gonna, $1,000 a month. And so $333 is not going to cover you very far. A voucher can come in and fill the gap between what you can pay and what your rent is. Vouchers are also used to create affordability as a subsidy in specific buildings, and they can also be used to help low-income families buy homes. This was interesting to me. The national average income of a voucher holder is $13,000, so well below what the median family income is for a single person in Portland and really anywhere in the country. In Multnomah County, we only have about 10,000 of the Section 8 federal housing vouchers available for about 36,000 people. So we have about 1 in 4 people who are getting the help they need from a voucher. They were created in 1974 as an alternative to building affordable multifamily apartments. The federal government, under President Nixon, decided they were tired of spending money building buildings, so they came up with a rent voucher plan. And all was going along pretty well until 1981, when the annual cost of the program went from $32 billion and started being slashed and went down to $7 billion in 1989. That was a reduction of 78% over an 8-year period. That led to an increase in homelessness, an increase in housing instability, and that those cuts that were made to the housing voucher program have never been replaced. Since 2000, about 350,000 vouchers nationwide have been created, and Congress has funded what they call incremental vouchers, and those are for specific populations, veterans, youth leaving foster care. But the number of total vouchers for each metropolitan area has not been increased since 1974, and the total dollar amount continues to stay at a very low investment level. The basic idea behind all of this is that all of us, regardless of our income, the idea is that all of us should pay no more than 30% of our income toward housing. And that's great if you have a well-paying job. But if you don't, you're going to need some funds to supplement and make sure you can pay your rent, especially when the housing costs, rent increases, even the cost of borrowing money, mortgages, housing costs are going up, but your income is not. So the idea is that the tenant who gets a voucher is expected to pay 30% of their income toward the rent. The voucher pays the rest. The vouchers are administered through the housing authority in our community. That's Home Forward. And the subsidy or voucher is paid by the housing authority directly to the landlord. So the money doesn't go to the tenant, it goes directly to the landlord. And part of the HUD Section 8 program requires that a house be in a specific level of habitability and safety. So, no rotting steps, no termites, no mold, that sort of thing. And that's really good because it ensures that the housing that people are going to get into is safe and decent. And a really great thing about Oregon is that Oregon law requires that all landlords accept a housing choice voucher. In many states across the US, a landlord can deny housing to someone because they are paying partially with a Section 8 voucher. And that's really an access barrier to housing. And I'm really glad, and many of us who work in this area are really glad that Oregon does not have that barrier. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how effective vouchers are. And this is Teddy. He is in his apartment and he's getting a short-term rent subsidy for us while he's waiting to move to a subsidized apartment. But he was able to get into this apartment after living with a friend because vouchers provide immediate housing affordability because they utilize existing housing. So you might have an expensive apartment that's available versus waiting for a so-called subsidized or affordable unit to be built. The voucher allows the tenant to have access to an immediate affordable unit. And so they're fast and really effective. They've been studied extensively, vouchers have, because they've been around a long time. There is a lot of data, and they've been proven to be very effective in reducing poverty and homelessness, as well as improving health outcomes for all household members, in particular, older adults, a population that we work with, so we're very interested, but also the outcomes for children who are within a family that's getting a rent voucher. That housing stability leads to better school outcomes and more opportunities. But I wanted to show you here the monthly cost comparison of hospital, jail, shelter bed, and rent voucher. And the reason that I selected these other shelter options to compare a rent voucher to is that unstable housing leads often to a lot of emergency room uses and hospitalization. It also leads to arrests because homelessness has typically been criminalized, and the response to homelessness has been to arrest the person. That's changing. Shelters are often a solution. And so you can see here that a hospital bed unlikely, but were you to be in the hospital for a month, it'd cost you almost $11,000, whereas a rent voucher on average is $700 per month per person. So not only are they effective in immediately getting into housing and having better outcomes for the health and well-being of the people who get them, but they're a lot cheaper and cost effective. And you know, you're going to be in the hospital for a month, and then where are you going to go? With a rent voucher that is long-term, you're going to be able to stay stable in housing. The same with shelter. Nobody wants to live in a shelter for more than a couple nights. So here's a very typical scenario. One of our clients here. Average studio apartment in Portland is about $1,045 a month. Typical extremely low income senior has a monthly income of about $900. The senior would pay $300 toward their rent, and the voucher would cover $745. And I just want to add here that this is the simplified version. The program, as administered by the Housing Authority, has a lot more detail in terms of how the rent is calculated, but for the most part, no recipient of a voucher is going to pay more than 40% of their income toward the rent. So Northwest Pilot Project had found over the years is that because there are only 10,000 vouchers in Multnomah County, but about 38,000 people needing a voucher and more low income people needing support and subsidy to access housing, again, because of the steep housing cost increase since 2015, especially, and the lack of increase in benefits like Social Security, as I mentioned. My colleague, Bobby Weinstock, who just retired after 32 years as the housing advocate at Pilot Project, he and I in 2017 started brainstorming how we could create a locally funded and managed rent assistance program for permanent vouchers. We believed that that was one of the only ways to supplement the shortfall in federal vouchers. And we also believed that there was money to do this. What we wanted was not only local funding, but local control, because while the HUD Section 8 program is very good in how it supports tenants, it's got a lot of red tape. And we felt that there could be a way to create a program in our community with our own funds and our own control to cut through the red tape, i.e. the barriers that keep people from getting into housing. So we went to Multnomah County, we went to Home Forward, the Housing Authority, we went to Meyer Memorial Trust. We got funding from Meyer to cover our costs as we worked with Multnomah County to convince them to invest in 45 vouchers for a project that would test the concept over an 18-month period. And we also asked Home Forward to be the administrator. So instead of creating a duplicate administrative system on our own that we would have to do, we asked Home Forward to do what they already do with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, but do it locally. We launched it in 2018 with 45 vouchers. We now have 70. Actually, I think it's 72. I double checked that just before we started. And we included in our partnership the nonprofit organization Join, which works with families and younger adults than those we work with. And Care Oregon also participated by supporting referrals for Care Oregon members into this voucher program. the fall of 2019, we were just getting ready to pitch a growth concept to the county and also bring it to the state, because we knew our concept was working and we wanted to grow it. And then COVID came along in early 2020, and that sort of put the brakes on that. But at the same time, energy was ramping up for the supportive housing services measure, which was a high income earner tax measure that passed in May 2020. And when that passed, it meant that Multnomah County was going to get about $150 million annually over the next 10 years. And a big chunk of that went into creating this new regional long-term rent assistance program, which was modeled after our program. I am so thrilled to be able to say that as of July 1st, the vouchers and the rent subsidies vouchers that have been created through this local regional program have started being distributed. And they're going to help at minimum 1,800 people just in Multnomah County, which is really exciting. We've also got interest at the state level within the state legislature for a statewide rent assistance program that would work through all of the housing authorities and throughout the state. The state actually used our model to undertake a rent voucher program for youth that are exiting the foster system, and that is operating right now, and they're collecting information about that. So we are very proud and excited that we were able to demonstrate that it is possible to create a locally based program. I have some links here, and I understand that this is being recorded, so you can have access to the links, but I'm also happy to email this information and send you other resources if you're interested. I've included an evaluation of our long-term rent assistance program that was done, as well as some great information from other organizations, and the wonderful article about Bobby Weinstock that was in Street Roots that got Joyce fired up to reach out to us. And then this is my contact information. And this is Sharon, who was one of the first people to get a long-term rent assistance voucher from us. She has multiple sclerosis and severe allergies and was unable to find housing she could afford to live in. And because of the voucher, she is now living a full life with her dog, Gracie, I believe her dog's name is. And we're really happy. This is, this is why we do our work. And this is my email address. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Laura, thank you so much for an informative presentation today and for your work with the Northwest Pilot Project. You certainly have shown a lot of dedication and creativity in expanding these programs, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you. As the MC, I'll ask the first question today. I know the questions are rolling in, and we'll get to those. So my question is, I know we have in our membership, and I certainly know people that would like to help in providing homes for people. And what are the guidelines for someone maybe with an extra room or two that they would like to rent out? Can they qualify for this program and be part of the voucher program?
Yes, absolutely. So your best avenue, if you have an extra room in your home that you're interested in renting out, place to go. There's two organizations. There's Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon has a program for home sharing. And then also there's Home Share of Oregon. And I can forward those links to you, Todd and David, for distribution. But both of those programs will can be utilized with the voucher because essentially the homeowner is acting as a landlord. And so as a private landlord, they can and must accept a voucher if the tenant that they select to house has a voucher. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, sounds great.
I think this is a good program. I think it's addressing a lot of needs, but there's other people who are seniors and other people who are in a category where they have just a little bit too much money to qualify for any of this stuff and maybe resources, but they don't have quite enough to deal with the rising rent. And there are like some of the subsidized housing to get into. You could go for the whole process of applying to these places and then discover because of you don't understand a lot of the technical stuff, you get disqualified for being slightly too much. But then you don't, at the same time, your rent is going up and up in market rate apartments, but you have no help, and your income doesn't keep up with that. So is there any help for people in that category who maybe are higher income than the 20,000 or under, but there's still not enough, low enough to qualify for any of this help, and they're still having the rents go up and up without any help?
So the great thing about the vouchers, whether they're the local voucher or the Section 8 voucher, is that they are adjusted based on your income. So there's no means test for the vouchers. You can come in with an income of, I take that back. There is a means test. They look at people that are below 50% of the median family income, which is a little bit higher than what we work with. But if you're a little bit over income, you can still qualify for a local voucher because the local vouchers have eliminated the strict means testing. But yes, that
county, or is it just Multnomah County?
Well, right now, so for the regional long-term rent assistance, it's Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington counties.
Okay, thank you. But how would you find that? How would you apply to that?
You would have to do it through a nonprofit organization. So any nonprofit organization that does housing, you would go to that organization. You can also contact the housing authority in each county.
And the terminology, it's called the what is the correct terminology for going? Because I get the terminology.
It's the regional long-term rent assistance program.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you. That's a really great question too about the income eligibility. That's one of the barriers that we wanted to eliminate in creating this local program because so many of the subsidized buildings and subsidized units do have barriers.
Yeah, I tried 3 times and got to the top of the waiting list, applied, got disqualified 3 times. I gave up, and I'm in my market rate apartment in Oregon City.
Oh, don't give up. Yeah, Clackamas County has funds for the regional rent assistance, and you can call the housing authority. They're the ones doing the administration in Clackamas County.
What's it called now?
Housing Authority of Clackamas County.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read Susan's question. When calculating the 30% for housing, are the cost of utilities taken into consideration?
Sometimes it depends. It will be determined depending on how the landlord is charging for utilities. Sorry to be vague on that, but there is some determination based on whether or not utilities are included as part of the rent.
Okay, I'll read the next question. When did the state of Oregon begin to require that all landlords accept Section 8 vouchers? I recall once being asked whether I was willing to accept Section 8 vouchers for existing renters in a home I owned at the time.
You know, I do not know the answer to that, but I believe it's been at least 15 years. I can look that up for you.
Our next question is from Joyce.
Thank you for coming, Laura. I spoke at little more length with Bobby Weinstock, whom you mentioned retired, and he made the statement that with the funds now that have been allocated by the state legislature, we have enough money in the vouchers program to house every single homeless person in Portland. That sounded pretty extreme to me, but is that an unrealistic expectation? And what kinds of obstacles do you run into with homeless people, some who may not want to move, some who are into drugs, some who are mentally incapacitated? What is keeping, if that's true, what is keeping this from happening?
So not to criticize Bobby, love Bobby, learned everything I know from him, but I think he may have been incorrect. I think what he was saying was that we could theoretically in the state of Oregon cover the cost of permanent rent subsidies for everyone who needed it if we were so inclined to do so. No decision has been made yet about that by the state. So the funds that Multnomah County, Clackamas County, and Washington County are getting are tax dollars. They're individual high income earner taxes and taxes on companies that make a certain amount of profit, 6 million annually or more. And so they're very specific. They were specifically proposed for spending on housing assistance for chronically homeless and at risk of homeless individuals. So people who are priced out of their housing. But it's very different from state dollars. The push that we're trying to make is to encourage the state to create a long-term rent subsidy program so that everyone in the state, from Portland to Malheur County, from Ontario to Coos Bay, there are people who are priced out of their housing and who can't make ends meet with housing. So a statewide rent assistance program would really help with that. So that's that piece. I think that is a whole other conversation in a lot of ways, because I think what we learned during COVID was how fragile the rental housing ecosystem is, and that without enough money to pay the rent, the landlord doesn't get paid. The people that the landlord pays to do building maintenance don't get paid. It's a whole domino effect. So I think that may actually help us make the case for a statewide rent assistance program. To the second half of your question, when it comes to people who are very high needs, whether they've been chronically homeless or they have mental health issues or addiction issues, the way that rent assistance helps them, and really the only way that it helps them, is when it's paired with social services, which is why it's important that social service agencies like Pilot Project have access to these vouchers. For instance, you might have somebody who's been homeless for 30 years, and we've actually encountered this over and over again. That person, for whatever reason, they had an eviction in their record, they have a criminal record, they have rent debt. They didn't want to live inside. They didn't want to follow the rules. After 10, 20, 30 years, they decide that it's time to get housing. They are the last on the list to get housing. And so what we do is pair the rent subsidy to get them into an affordable unit with ongoing one-on-one in-depth services that address the needs that they have, whether that's dealing with PTSD for military service or continuing drug and alcohol addiction services, or just life skills. You know, we take for granted that we all have the life skills to keep our apartment clean and sanitary. And, you know, we understand what it means to be a good neighbor and a good tenant. And some people just don't have that. And, you know, most of the people that Pilot Project works with are people who don't have those underlying barriers. They are just very, very low income. But the people with barriers, there's a service delivery system called permanent supportive housing. And it's as if you have someone by your side to help you navigate the ins and outs of being a good tenant so that you stay stably housed.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions that I'll intersperse in the Q&A here as we wait for other questions to roll in. I'll start with this one. Until COVID, I had a 5-year career or so in real estate that where I had the mission of helping disadvantaged populations, people with disabilities, and others to improve their housing situation. And since COVID, I haven't really followed the market as closely as I did. I know that we've taken some steps to improve our housing inventory with the Metro bond. And can you kind of give us an update on just where our rental housing inventory is right now?
Thank you. That's a great question. And for those of you who don't know, the city of Portland passed a housing bond in November 2016, and then Metro passed a housing bond a couple years later. Both of those bonds led to the construction of multiple units, but region-wide, we're still short about, you know, there are various numbers. I'd say it's still short about 25,000 units for people who are very low and extremely low income. And that's why the vouchers are so important. They create that immediate access to market rate units where we don't have to wait for construction. Doesn't mean we don't need the construction. The construction is really, really important. I don't have the unit count at hand, but would be happy to get back to you with that too, because the bonds have been very effective in getting units built. It's still really expensive to build housing. I think that that is one part of the housing challenge that we have, is how do we reduce the cost of building housing? So.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from Mike Richet that I'll click on here and take a look at. What can be done about the skyrocketing rents that cause so much homelessness? Are there any preventative social measures that can be done to curb this?
Well, the only measure I know of is rent control, which is a very hot potato, divisive topic. Otherwise, in a free market capitalistic economy like ours, we have very few levers that we can pull. One thing that the state did do was put a cap on the amount that landlords could increase the annual rent, 10%, I believe it was. And there was a lot of pushback on that. Otherwise, that is a conversation that we really need to have as a community, as a state, as a country. Do we believe that housing is a human right, or is it really a commodity? The tension that often comes up with conversations with property owners, property managers, and small landlords especially, is that, they are relying on that housing income to supplement their retirement, because they're also not getting huge retirement payouts. And so for people who have planned that, to forego that stream of income to balance the fact that people can't get into housing is real challenging. So that, I personally hope, and I think Pilot Project as an organization would like to get involved more in this conversation about, what do we do? What other levers can we set up? What can we learn from states and municipalities that have rent control, and what's worked and what hasn't worked about that?
Yeah, Gail makes the comment down here to pick up on what you said there. Some people are both landlords and renters.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of very small landlords who have maybe one unit. They maybe have a duplex and they rent the duplex. Maybe they have 2 units. Maybe they have their mother's house that they decided to rent out instead of sell. And their financial situation is very different from a property owner who has multiple sites of 100-unit plus buildings. And so and this is part of the work that the City of Portland's Rental Services Commission does, is to look at these problems and try to tease out, how is it different for a small landlord to make ends meet while still offering decent, safe, and affordable housing to low-income folks. And again, the voucher is great because it helps the tenant and it gives the landlord as close to the full amount of rent that they need.
Right. We have another question from Joyce that I'll read. Do we have a sense of what percentage of the current population living in tents are simply struggling financially and could be moved relatively easily without much social service help?
I would say it's probably the majority. Typically in the overall population of people that are coming to social service organizations like Pilot Project for assistance, typically about 12% are chronically homeless, and chronically homeless because of challenges beyond economics. But for many of the people that we see now who are homeless, it really is simply an economics issue made significantly worse by COVID. People lost their jobs, lost their income, lost their housing. There are many families out there, many children who are still going to school, even though they're homeless and living in a tent. If we could get those folks not only set up with jobs, but with a voucher, they would be able to, I think, stabilize their housing quickly.
Okay, our current president, Mr. Dave DiNucci, has a question.
I'm just wondering, so since COVID has been with us, there have been certain programs put into place to try to keep people from losing their housing. How has that been interacting with you guys? Have you seen it as effective? Do you have to help out just to keep people in their housing, even with these programs, or what is your?
Yeah, thank you. So COVID made the housing crisis worse. So we already had a housing crisis before COVID. So we were already getting, we get about 150 calls a week for assistance. And we're a small organization. We have, we are just expanding now, and we have, I think, 18 people who work directly with clients, but we would probably need twice that or 3 times that to address all of the calls that we get. So COVID made it significantly worse. And the CARES Act dollars that came into Multnomah County and to us definitely helped people from getting evicted. The challenge with the COVID dollars was that people had to demonstrate that they were affected by COVID. So for many of the seniors that we work with who lost their jobs, and we have many seniors who are still working, and those that lost their jobs because of COVID, we were able to easily help them, with 3 to 4 months of rent. Unfortunately, for them to be stably housed again, they would need to get their job back. In this particular subset of the people that we help, the jobs didn't come back at the same time that the rent assistance money ran out. So we were able to get a direct allocation through the housing authority that we utilized with clients who were eligible for it, and some clients who we had never helped before and who were facing eviction for the first time because they had, lost their jobs. A lot more money has come into the state, and some of you may have seen the challenges that Oregon Housing and Community Services, our state agency that addresses housing issues, has had in getting the money that the federal government provided, getting that out the door to people. And we're not part of that system. I mean, we have clients come to us and we have to refer them, but we have lots of input to Oregon Housing and Community Services about how that could be done better and faster. I think the other thing about that is because the impact of COVID on the economy has lasted so much longer than was expected when the initial allocation of rent assistance was distributed by the federal government, we're still seeing that people need rent assistance.
Okay, we have a question from Paul Gibbons that I'll read. What city, state, or country would you say has been considered most effective in addressing widespread homelessness, and what were the conditions there that allowed them to be effective in turning it around?
Utah, the state of Utah at one point had a really great program that paired vouchers with an approach called Housing First, which is basically to say, you house the person regardless of what problems they may have, even if it's a severe drug addiction problem. And because they're in housing, you can then treat them. And so they invested both in services and vouchers, and they did a pretty good job. But then that was, I think, 3 years ago, they didn't sustain the investment. And I think they backslid a little bit. Iceland has done an amazing job as a country in addressing homelessness, but in the same way, they invested heavily. A lot of money in a system that basically says we are going to cover the costs of people's housing and services when they cannot cover that cost themselves. And then there was a community in Mississippi, I believe, that recently reported that they had eliminated homelessness. And again, it was because of, for them, it was a system improvement and an investment. And the system improvement is one that Multnomah County is going to try to utilize and implement, I think, in the next 6 months.
It sounds like, ironically, Utah might have been the first state to treat housing as a human right, but then maybe the voters realized what was going on and didn't like that.
Yeah, I will have to go back and look and see where they're at now, because they did do a remarkable thing.
Yeah. We have a question from Nada.
I actually have two questions. One is the term affordable housing just to me seems like an oxymoron, because if there was affordable housing, we wouldn't need vouchers. And so I'm wondering about that. How is that defined? I don't even know how that's defined besides 30% of an income or something. And the other question is, what happened to the city's requirement of developers that they have a certain percentage of affordable apartments in their buildings? And years ago, it was discovered that that requirement was there, but it was never enforced. And so I'm wondering if you know anything about that.
So I'll start with the second one. So that's the inclusionary zoning ordinance that was passed by the city of Portland, I believe in late 2017. It required that any new construction of multifamily units larger than 20 units had to have at least 10% set aside as affordable, meaning
Well,
that
it was actually discovered probably 10 years ago or so that they had that requirement and they weren't enforcing it.
that precedes my time at Pilot Project. I know that the ordinance was that the inclusionary zoning ordinance was passed more recently than that, like as I said, 2017-16. And I think it was February of 2018. And what happened with that was that a lot of builders and developers said, I'm just not going to build. I'm just not going to build anything. And that the number of permits that came into the city Bureau of, I guess, of Planning peaked just before February 1st of the year that it went into effect, and then decreased significantly since then. So we haven't seen a lot of commercial developers, a lot of community development organizations, nonprofit organizations that build affordable housing continue to do so because they would be doing it anyway. So the inclusionary zoning rule didn't really apply to them, but it has had a negative effect on the construction of new units. And Nida, I will go back and look to see what happened 10 years ago, because I'm curious about that. So thank you. And as far as the term affordable housing, yeah, that basically is a term we should all stop using because it's all relative. My housing is only affordable when I'm paying no more than 30% of my income toward it. That is the same. If we all use that standard, what is affordable to me is going to be very different to what is affordable to one of the people who comes to Pilot Project. Typically, it's used by HUD. Affordable housing is any housing that where the fair market rent is equal to or less than 80% of the median family income. So HUD sets these standards, and they set standards for the whole country, and they're formulaic. And I think that the challenge is that we forget that the formula might apply as an easy calculation to determine a voucher amount or what the fair market rent is in a community. But we have to bring it back to the client and to the person seeking the help, and to say, if your income, if you're on SSI right now, you are getting $794 a month. That means that you should only be paying about $250 a month in rent. Where are you going to find a place to rent in Multnomah County for $250? You're not. So the idea with the vouchers is what makes them affordable to the tenant is that the tenant still only pays 30% and the voucher pays the rest. The reality for many tenants right now is that they're actually paying 50 or 60% of their rent, of their income toward rent, and leaving them with very little cash left over to pay for the basic necessities.
Looks like we have another question from Dave Danucci.
I'm just wondering about the building boom, so to speak, in Portland and maybe other places, I don't know, but the claim is that, you know, even when people are building all these very high-end units, that's going to help with the housing crisis, et cetera, because all the people living in the other units are going to move up into those and leave lots of empty units and lower the prices overall because of supply and demand. There's also been, I'm a member of some Facebook groups that are about demolishing Portland and stuff like that. And there's lots and lots of complaints that, like with the current policies of building in Portland, the zoning rules, that somebody will come in and tear down a house and build like 4 units in its place, whereas the house has been around forever. It's all the investment's been done. Maybe some lower income people could rent the house without too much trouble. And yet, even though there's more units going in the same area, those units will often rent for way more than maybe the house would have or something. So it actually it actually makes the problem worse than making it better, even though the supply is going up. What is your view on all this supply and demand stuff?
Well, my particular view is that part of the increase in the number of units being built is being driven by the number of people moving to Portland who can afford to pay the fair market rent. We do not, contrary to what is stated in some circles, we do not have a flood of low-income people coming to Portland looking for subsidies and service and, you know, rent assistance. What we have is an influx of high wage earners who are looking for a nice apartment to live in and who can afford to pay, you know, $1,800 for a studio, $2,100 for 1 bedroom. And so that's what's driving the construction. There is some truth, I think, to the sort of trickle-down effect of more units overall means more units for everyone. But I think that's a long time coming. And then, you know, the other ordinance that was recently passed, which sort of goes to your it's sort of tangential to your example about the house being torn down and replaced with fourplex. The residential infill project or program was, you know, an ordinance that was really aimed at saying, let's eliminate single family housing zoning and allow people to take down a single family house and put up a fourplex in what would have been a street or a neighborhood of single family homes. And the idea was that you could utilize not just land that had a single family home on it, but an empty property or a duplex that could be turned into a fourplex, and you would create more housing in the long run. The things that I've read about that, I think there are arguments on both sides. And Sightline Institute up in Seattle has some great research about this particular thing. But again, it's a long-term solution. It's probably a good long-term solution for a municipality, a community, a county like, you know, Multnomah. If Multnomah County were to adopt it for the city of Portland, it's probably a good land use planning option. I don't, you know, it's not going to add new units quickly that are necessarily going to be affordable. The other thing about construction is that from the developer's perspective, they have to create a building that is going to allow them to make money, because that is their intent. Again, housing is a commodity. They're building an apartment building so that they can make money. So the building has to not only pay for itself, the rents have to be high enough to generate profit. And therein lies another challenge around construction.
Okay, it's been an engaging Q&A so far. I will ask one more question as we wait for any final burning questions to come in. My question's an extension of Dave's first question. At the beginning of your presentation, you showed on a macro level that Republican administrations tend to not view affordable housing as a key issue, and then more progressive demonstrations try and do a little bit to help the problem. It's been hard to follow the Biden infrastructure bills and different bills in Congress, but what's your sense on a national level of things that may be coming in the pipeline?
Right now, it still feels very positive for housing, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to reinvest significantly in the Section 8 voucher program in the next year. And that is what a lot of the advocacy organizations like the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the National Low Income Law Center are advocating for. And the Biden administration and the new Secretary of HUD, Marcia Fudge, are very open to creating additional cash investments in Section 8, which would be hugely significant. So we are, I think collectively, those of us who work in this area and who see the need on a daily basis are feeling pretty positive. But, you know, not quitting my day job.
That's very good to hear, though. Nice to see that there might be some positive things on the horizon. Fittingly, Joyce, the esteemed member of our programming committee, is going to have the final comment in this Q&A on landlords. Joyce.
You know, I used to not have very much sympathy for landlords until I became one. And my sisters and I inherited my parents' family, the house we grew up in a small farm in Illinois. And so because we rent out the farmland, we decided not to sell. We would just rent out that house. And it worked rather well. You know, we're long distance landlords, so we're not in touch with what's happening. But when one particular renter did so much damage to the house that we had to put $3,000 to $4,000, I don't remember exactly how much we had to put into it, to practically renovate the house, then I became much more sympathetic to the problems. And when you mentioned the problems of small landlords, and they're watching their incomes as well, and the whole thing is a chain. It's all interrelated. And so I have more empathy for that particular link.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. And I will say that, you know, our approach, because we don't manage housing or build housing or own housing, no landlords, no housing. So our approach has always been to partner with landlords to make sure we understand their perspective, and that you know, not all tenants are good and not all landlords are evil. It's just each has a piece of the sort of the puzzle to play in housing stability, and how do we make it work for everyone? And sometimes that seems impossible, and yet when we listen and respect each other's positions, I think that you know, we can make progress.
Okay, thank you, Laura, for a very engaging and informative presentation.